it's specifically the idea of encouraging Sabbath rest through discouraging commerce on the Sabbath. The proposal that's in our book is amending the basic federal overtime law, Fair Labor Standards Act, to require that overtime be paid for all work done on the Sabbath.
We're not obligated to satisfy every group under the sun.
We are told, my friends, a time is going to come when men will not only forbid Sunday work, but they will try to force men to labor on the Sabbath.
Exodus 28, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor, do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, daughter, manservant, maidservant, cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and hallowed it, made it holy, set it apart. John 15:10, if ye keep my commandments, ye shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. John 14:15, if ye love me, keep my commandments, and I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may abide with you forever. So we see God's people are classified as those that keep the commandments of God. 1 John 2:3, and hereby we do know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments, or obey him, is a liar. Anybody. And the truth is not in him. But whoso keepeth his word, in him verily is the love of God perfected. Hereby we know that we are in him. Revelation 22:14, blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life, and may enter in through the gates into the city. Everybody cool with the law of God until it talks about the Sabbath. Then all of a sudden, we ain't under it or obligated to it or supposed to keep it no more. The safest thing to do is to stick with the scriptures. Y'all got to see this.
Here it is. The first deception. On April 1st, 2025, President Trump nominated Jonathan Berry of Maryland to be solicitor for the Department of Labor. And breaking news, on yesterday, October 7, 2025, the Senate voted 51-47 to confirm a group of President Trump's nominees. And as you can see, Jonathan Berry was confirmed. Watch the first deception. Red words. Berry authored the chapter on the Department of Labor in the Conservative Policy Blueprint Project 2025. But, here it is now, but during his Senate confirmation hearing, he sought to distance himself from its proposals. First deception. In order to secure this confirmation of his nomination, he acted as if he was not a part, never a part of Project 2025. First deception. No wonder Christ said in Matthew 24 and verse 3 and verse 4, a sign of the last days, let no man deceive you. Watch carefully. This is the second deception. Watch carefully. This is President Trump on the campaign trail just before that November election in 2024. And what did he say? He distanced himself from Project 2025. I know nothing about it. Although October 2nd, Trump now embraces Project 2025 after disavowing it during the 2024 campaign. You may pause the video and read the rest of that. I'm not going to bore you today. Clip 1.
During the 2024 campaign and throughout his time at the White House, President Trump has repeatedly said he had, quote, nothing to do with Project 2025. Though in this morning's post about Vote, Trump did acknowledge his OMB director's connection, identifying him as, quote, of Project 2025 fame.
He was on the record when the team was trying to distance itself from you. I have no idea who is behind it. He put on X. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. Do you have a sense of what he likes or doesn't like here?
I think the key thing is that President Trump saw the branding as a liability in the political season.
There it is.
But I also would anticipate moving forward that the president-elect and vice president-elect, with whom we maintain great relationships.
Enough. That was deception number 2. After Trump's Project 2025 denials, he's tapping, nominating, selecting its authors and influencers for key roles. Trump's cabinet is filling up with Project 2025 authors, despite him saying he has no idea, quote unquote, what it is. And here is Kevin Roberts, the man behind Trump, saying there is no doubt Trump will implement Project 2025. Now, friends, before I get into deception number 3, here is the roll call vote on the Senate floor.
The yeas are 51, the nays are 47. The nominations in block are confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the president will be immediately notified of the Senate's actions.
You know, as I said a few days ago, these men are liars. They are deceivers. And yet Trump, Berry, Kevin Roberts, J.D. Vance, and others, Russ Vought and others, they're calling for the implementation of the 10 Commandments in the public square in public schools. Well, have they forgotten that one of those 10 Commandments forbids lying, bearing false witness? And when you sit in a hearing, you are a witness. They are telling lies, deception, deception. No wonder in Matthew 15, verse 6 through verse 10, Christ says, they say one thing with their lips, one thing with their mouth, but their hearts, their actions are far from me. Deception, deception. Well, I just said deception, deception. Let's go now to deception number 3. I want everyone to watch this. This is Jonathan Berry's Mr. Mark of the Beast, I call him. This is Mr. Mark of the Beast statement in Project 2025 handbook. If you notice, he writes on the Sabbath rest that he will petition the Department of Labor to make sure American workers rest on Sunday. But notice, he inserted in the document Saturday rest, Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. So on the surface, it appears that Mr. Mark of the Beast, every time I say that label, you now know who I'm talking. It appears on the surface that Mr. Mark of the Beast is going to tolerate, accommodate Sabbath keepers. No, that's one thing he wrote. Hear what he said afterward. Deception number 3. Clip 1.
What are the big picture? How do we sell America on this vision of labor is good and sacred and
yes,
and also then what are you on day one taking to the new Secretary of Labor?
Something I really encourage. I don't see a big. It's harder to see a big federal role for this. I think this is more a question of state and local law. Is reinvigorating where possible Sabbath rest laws.
The Sabbath rest he's talking about hails from Emperor Constantine, Emperor of the Roman Empire, in 321 AD. That Sabbath was Sunday law, Sunday rest, Sunday worship by law.
To be very specific, like it used to be, this was basically the norm through, as best I've looked into this some. I'm working on some research on this. Really literally dating back to Constantine and his recognition of Christianity in the Roman Empire. That you've had a pretty consistent tradition in Western civilization of taking Sunday off from commerce, having a time not only it's not merely from rest in the sense of abstinence from work, but it's rest for time with God, time worshiping God. It's rest for time with community, and even in between is time with family.
They will try to increase overtime pay so that workers don't have to work on Sunday.
Proposals that you've laid out in Project 2025 handbook from Heritage is stuff around the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the ideas that you have there?
Yes. This is. It sounds controversial. Mm-hmm. In many respects, it is a return to something that basically always everyone ever had. Mm-hmm. And it's specifically the idea of encouraging Sabbath rest through discouraging commerce on the Sabbath. The proposal that's in our book is amending the basic federal overtime law, Fair Labor Standards Act, to require that overtime be paid for all work done on the Sabbath. So this is, I think this is about as far as the federal government could properly go in this space, but it would be an encouragement and inducement to rest, but really to kind of coordinate commercial activity for the other 6 days of the week.
What? Beloved, do I need to repeat that? The host asked him specifically about his statements, his writings rather, in Project 2025 manual. This man answered by saying in that same interview, he's pushing for work on all the other 6 days of the week, but not on Sunday. He mentioned inducement, great controversy, page 607. God's people, red words at the bottom, will be threatened with fines, imprisonment, and some will be offered positions of influence and other rewards and advantages as inducements to renounce their faith.
I don't have bright line rules to give you here, but I want to lay out some guideposts, some categories of state actions that are likelier to be prudent applications of state power to balance corporate power.
Mercy.
And another one in the collective action space that I'm fond of, call it the Chick-fil-A rule, would be to revive Sunday closing laws and carve out a space under which commerce does not intrude. Very well settled that this is within a state's authority to do.
In a pluralist society, if you reinstate blue laws, then you would have to outlaw sports teams on Saturday in order to accommodate Jews for the Sabbath, or Muslims, Seventh-day Adventist. So how do you kind of thread that needle? Well,
we're not obligated to satisfy every group under the sun.
Is basically that what you're doing is it's a de facto privileging of Christianity, because which religion has the Sabbath on Sunday? Well, it's Christianity.
Mercy.
And so you're not doing it on Saturday.
We are told, my friends, a time is going to come when men will not only forbid Sunday work, but they will try to force men to labor on the Sabbath. And men will be asked to renounce the Sabbath and to subscribe to Sunday observance or forfeit their freedom and their lives. My friends, what did Mr. Mark of the Beast say? He is going to force commerce on the 6 other days of the week, but not on Sunday. And what does that statement say in inspiration? The day will come that we will be forced to labor on the Sabbath. Do we understand the 2 phases of the Sunday law implementation, and which phase Mr. Mark of the Beast is going to play? This is Ken Ivory, a congressman of Utah. Do you know what he's promoting? using the state power to force corporations to close on Sunday. Do you realize in Utah what they're promoting? Not only corporations to close on Sunday to rest, but they're talking about worship. Worship. They are talking about people resting and worshiping. Now, pause the video. You can read most of that. Look at the last paragraph, the last sentence. It doesn't state whether the proposed measure in Utah would offer similar religious freedom protections for Friday, the Sabbath for Muslims, or Saturday, the principal worship day for Seventh-day Adventists. Beloved, this is the Salt Lake Tribune writing that. And the author is Tamara Kemsley at the bottom left. And they're highlighting that this is going to bring Seventh-day Adventists into conflict with the state law in Utah. The law that they are enacting, they said, goes back to something called Sundays Accepted, end quote. Sundays Accepted. What is that? It goes back to the U.S. Constitution. It goes back to the 1800s. It goes back to Sunday blue laws, but they're telling us it's going to be worse. There it is, friends. Spend time in church. Sundays accepted. Spend time in church. Mr. Mark of the Beast has come to the kingdom at such a time as this. Lord have mercy. In all the states, Seventh-day Sabbath keepers were thrown into chain gangs. It's right there. You can pause the video and read that. I'm giving you history and how history will be repeated. It's all there, friends. Chain gang. When a man, white or black, is arrested for Sunday breaking, he's placed at a great disadvantage. And it goes on. Third sentence. Often, when Sabbath keepers in the southern states are arrested for working on Sunday, they are sent to the chain gang, where they are forced to work on the Sabbath. This is the Washington Post now. Watch this. Between 1830 and 1890, a series of states passed laws known as the quote-unquote Sunday laws. All right? Those who supported the laws regarded Sunday as the real Sabbath. Operative word, real Sabbath. However, for Adventists, the Sabbath begins at sundown Friday and ends at sunset the following day. During the Civil War, the National Reform Association began to argue that the Union was, at the time, losing the war because its people were not faithful enough. Lord have mercy. And before this period was over, a number of Adventists, particularly those living in the Upper South, faced actual criminal prosecution for daring to work or engage in other activities on Sundays. In 1888, New Hampshire Congressman Henry Blair even attempted to pass a national Sunday law. But the measure failed. Why? In large part to the organized objections of whom? Seventh-day Adventists. But at the state level, some of the Adventists' persecutions and the social and cultural, some of those Adventists' prosecutions and the social and cultural stigma attached to Adventists' Saturday Sabbath contributed to many Americans believing, watch this, that Adventists were not Christians or were members of a cult. Some people believed and claimed in various public forums that Adventists were trying to destroy the Sunday Sabbath and with it America. Lord have mercy. Those who honor the Bible Sabbath will, that's future, be denounced as enemies of law and order, as breaking down the moral restraints of society, causing anarchy. So what will they call Seventh-day Sabbath keepers? Anarchists, terrorists, destroyers. And what did they call SDAs in the 1880s? Anarchists, terrorists. Watch this now. I was waiting for this day. Several days ago, I shared with you how recently they conflated. They put SDAs in the same box as QAnon. Do you remember that? As QAnon and the other group there, the other terrorist group there, QAnon. That's who and Antifa. That's it. Antifa and QAnon. Now it makes sense. I was waiting for this day, my friends. Just as I juxtaposed Mr. Mark of the Beast with Henry Blair, that senator, son-in-law. Do you know, in the time of Henry Blair, the senator pushing the son-in-law in 1880, do you know who was the Pope? The Pope was Pope Leo the 13th. Let that sink in. Where am I going now? Come on, talk to me. Where am I going now? Mr. Mark of the Beast is doing similar to what Henry Blair did. And who's the Pope today? Pope Leo the 14th. Who is writing the script? It's on the screen right here, friends. Pope Leo the 13th. There it is. And the current Pope, present Pope, is Pope Leo the 14th. The first phase of the implementation of the Sunday law crisis is to get the states to bring back Sunday closings, Sunday rest by law, Sunday worship by law in the states. That's the first phase. The second phase, it's going to be federalized, and then comes persecution for Seventh-day Sabbath keepers. That's the second phase. Now, it's a possibility. Mr. Sunday Law knows nothing about the second phase. He's simply concerned about the first phase, using the state to force Sunday closings for corporations and people. Rest on Sunday, go to church on Sunday. It's a possibility. He knows nothing about the federalization of this and the persecution of Seventh-day Sabbath keepers. The assertion that God's judgments are visited upon men for their violation of the Sunday Sabbath will be repeated. Already, it is beginning to be urged, and a movement to enforce Sunday observance is fast gaining ground.
Remember, look at verse 7 of Acts chapter 20. Now on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message unto midnight. So this says, here we see an example of the disciples gathering together on the first day of the week. There is no mention of a Sabbath being observed in this verse. Nowhere is the day called the Sabbath. In fact, we know that Paul was ready to depart the next day. According to verse 7, Paul spoke to them a message because for this very reason. So look at this. So we cannot confirm that this scripture in Acts 20 is a Sabbath day observance. In fact, nowhere does it say that the first day of the week is the Sabbath, but the seventh day of the week is always called the Sabbath in the New Testament. Unless you don't believe in the New Testament, you would have to conclude that this was not a Sabbath meeting. So what was it really? Many may not realize that in Scripture, a day begins at sundown. This would mean that at sundown on Saturday, the first day of the week begins. Once the Sabbath ends on Saturday night, this would have been the appropriate time to cook food and break bread because cooking was not done on the Sabbath. That's according to Exodus 16:23. Thus, it is most likely an after Sabbath fellowship meal where Paul continued to speak until midnight because he wanted to get as much teaching in as possible before he departed the next morning. Nevertheless, in spite of 85 other examples of where Paul and the other disciples were participating in Sabbath observance on the seventh day of the week, some will hang on to this one verse so that they may continue their tradition. 1 Corinthians 16, 1-2, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also. On the first day of the week, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up, as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. However, since the Sabbath ends at sundown on Saturday, if everyone was keeping the Ten Commandments as written, and properly observing the Sabbath on the seventh day, the proper time for handling monies would have been on Saturday night when the Sabbath had ended. Thus, they would have cooked their meals and handled orders of business after Sabbath on the first day of the week. Nowhere in this verse does it say they were keeping the Sabbath on the first day of the week, or that the Sabbath had been changed, or they were holding services on this day. One would have to inject these thoughts into the text based on one's assumptions and traditions rather than getting these thoughts from the text itself. The burden of proof is not on one who continues to keep the Sabbath. The burden of proof is on the one who makes the claim that the Sabbath has been changed or abolished. You can search the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation, and you will not find a single verse that says his Sabbath was changed to a different day. There is not a single verse that tells us that the Ten Commandments are not to be kept, and there is not a single verse that prophesied either of these two events occurring. In fact, the scriptures declare the seventh day to be the Sabbath in the Ten Commandments. In the words of the prophets, in the writings of Yahushua, and in the Acts of the Apostles, it continues to speak of the Sabbath being observed by Jews and Gentiles in prophecies of the future kingdom. First, we must understand that the Emperor Constantine enforced keeping the Sabbath on the first day of the week, which he calls the Venerable Day of the Sun. Venerable means commanding respect, suggesting the sun deity should be respected. The text of Constantine's Sunday law of 321 AD is, on the Venerable Day of the Sun, let the magistrates and people residing in the cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. Do y'all see this stuff in history? Y'all can look this up. This forced Sabbath may explain why some groups were observing both the seventh day of the week as the Sabbath, but then also meeting on the first day of the week. The people of Constantinople and almost everywhere assembled together on the Sabbath as well as on the first day of the week, which custom is never observed at Rome or Alexandria. This is interesting, in that only the Christians of Rome and Constantinople forsook the Sabbath day while other churches continued keeping it. Constantine must have had quite an influence over the Roman Christians and Catholics. Oh my. The primitive Christians did keep the Sabbath of the Jews. Therefore, the Christians for a long time together did keep their conventions on the Sabbath, in which some portion of the law were read, and this continued to the time of the Laodicean Council. The ancient Christians were very careful in the observance of Saturday or the seventh day. It is plain that all the Oriental churches and the greatest part of the world observed Sabbath as a festival. Ambrose, the celebrated bishop of Milan, said that when he was in Milan, he observed Saturday, but when in Rome, observed Sunday. This gave rise to the proverb, when you are in Rome, do as Rome does. Later, those who observed the Sabbath were persecuted and killed by the Catholic Church. This is all history. There was and is a commandment to keep holy the Sabbath day, but that Sabbath day was not on Sunday. It will be said, however, and with some show of triumph, that the Sabbath was transferred from the seventh to the first day of the week. Where can the record of such a transaction be found? Not in the New Testament. Of course, I quite well know that Sunday did come into use in early Christian history as a religious day, as we learned from the Christian fathers and other sources. But what a pity that it comes branded with the mark of paganism, and christened with the name of a sun god, when adopted and sanctioned by the papal apostasy, and bequeathed as a sacred legacy to Protestantism. Dr. Edward Hiscox, author of the Baptist Manual. Y'all know the motto here: Scripture over everything. Revelation 14:11. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Here is the patience or the endurance of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Man.